Right, well, we've got pretty much all the parts off the donor car now. This is the flywheel, which was surprisingly easy to get off. Gearbox is in the lockup next door. These are the drive shafts. This little cap here that fits over that centre bearing for that half shaft. So we're going to work our way through these, get them all cleaned up before they go back on. I've ordered a new set of inner and outer boots for here because these are notorious for splitting. In fact, I think this one is a cheap universal one, and these ones are definitely showing signs of damage, so that's just a disaster waiting to happen. So yeah, we've got a full set of those on order. We'll get those cleaned up and rebuilt. Right, let's get to it. So I checked all the joints prior to filming and they were all perfectly serviceable, so absolutely no reason to replace those. That's why we're just going to do a clean up, put on some new gaiters and make it look presentable to go back on the car. Before anyone has a heart attack watching me take a wire brush to the inside of the bearing cap, that's not a bearing surface, it just holds the bearing on the shaft in place. So don't worry, I'm not an idiot. Yeah, it's not perfect, but much better. A bit cleaner for going back on. On to the next bit. Okay, I'm going to make a start on the drive shafts. This is the passenger side shaft. So we're going to replace both of these, but we're going to strip it down first, give it a good clean, maybe get some of the crap off that end, which is the bit that goes through the hub, and get it looking nice and presentable to go back on the car. So the first bit to do is to get these clamps off here, here, here. Well, it's not a clamp, is it? It's a bloody cable tie. And here, and so you see, I've just taken the first one off. Solution seems to be brute force and an old knackered screwdriver. Standard. So, nothing a bit of brute force and ignorance can't solve. So those are off. So, next job is to cut the boots, get them out of the way, clean as much of the CV grease as we can so that we can see the circlip that's holding the joint on. So, this is a rather horrible job. You've got to clean as much out as you can from the joint so that you can access a little circlip that's inside. So the best piece of advice I can give you is some fresh latex gloves and lots of disposable shop rag. And you can see there is a circlip just there. So we're going to have to prise that off so that we can disconnect the joint here with its ball race from the main shaft. And we can clean all that up, ready to re-grease it, but that allows us to slide the new gaiter back on so we can then reassemble it all. So we've got the CV separated from the shaft. You can see the ring here where the circlip sits in. It is very, very fiddly. In fact, the needle nose pliers are the best tool for the job, it seems. Thank you to Robert Spinner for that. I had to go and look up his video because the Haynes Book of Lies really is a Haynes Book of Lies, and I got nowhere with their technique. Just making a note of how this is aligned to the spline. So there's already 2 dots on the shaft, and it seems to be that is aligned to this dot here. So I've taken some high-res photos so I can go back and check afterwards. Now to strip it all down and clean it all up. I'm going to put a link to Robert's video in the description. If you're doing anything on an old Volvo, definitely go and check out his channel. Loads of really good videos on there. So the CV is completely off. We've also taken the gaiter off the inside CV. Now that doesn't actually need to come apart for this because we can slide the boot for that on from the outside where we've already exposed the splines. So we're going to mask all that up, make sure it's nice and safe so we don't get any muck in there. Just give this a bit of a clean so it looks nice, being sure to protect the bit that goes in the gearbox, which is this bit here. And then we can start assembling. So after a bit of a fight with some crappy masking tape that left loads of gunk on here, we are now cleaned up, ready to re-grease the inner CV and get the, certainly the inner CV boot on. The outer CV, you'll see here, has the ABS ring on. Now that's not the worst I've seen, but it also doesn't look great, so we're going to knock that one off, and then when the new ones arrive, which they haven't yet, we will heat a new one up and slot it back on. With that, just enough time to clean the outer CV up and put all the tools away, ready for when the parts arrive. First ABS ring off. Nothing a bit of butane couldn't solve, and a bit of brute force. Luckily, I managed not to set my little wooden clamps on fire. So, time to clean this up, get some grease in the CV, and put it all back together. Ta-da! As if by magic, we have some ABS rings. Note 3, because for the sake of a couple of quid, it's worth having a spare in case I break one. So now the ABS ring is off. I just thought I'd clean up the surface underneath a little bit to make sure the new one goes on nice and easily. So a bit of fettling, and then we're ready to heat and fit. Prepare for terrible camera angles because the battery died there. So you can just about make out in the top corner of the screen what's actually happening. ABS ring is successfully on. So that's now just cooling down. It's still a bit hot to touch. We've got some nice goodies. So we have the outer CV boot kit, which will go on the outer, so that's the stub shaft. And then we have the inner boot kit, so that will actually go on first and mount all up. Then we'll put the gaiter for the outer one on, grease all that up and assemble that end. So first of all, some gloves, because it's a disgusting job. CV grease is horrible. Slide the boot on, fill it with grease, and then there's a little bit of a trick involving a little bit of fairy liquid to get the first fold of the gaiter, so you've got purchase on the end piece to flip it over the CV. Then onto the other side. So you may have just noticed me get my other phone out to check the original footage to make sure I lined it up in just the right spot. As you note, there was some little marks on where exactly it needed to be lined up. So I don't want the shaft to be out of balance. I wanted to get it just so. And then the same thing again, squeeze the CV grease in, fiddle around with the fitting. We have success. Both gaiters are on. The outer one here, the inner one here. Bit of a squeeze getting them over the larger diameters, but that's quite reassuring. It means they're not going to slide off in a hurry. Next job is to put the clips on, and we actually have some new tools for this. So here are the new tools. I wasn't sure what type of clips would come with the gaiters. This is the type we've got. So I've got two types of tool. This one here is for the banding type of clip that goes on. So it's just a clip that feeds through itself. You tighten it up and then just fold it over itself, and there's some little flaps you pin down to stop it coming loose. But the type we've got are crimps, so we're not going to use that. We're going to use this little tool here. Now normally I would use this fella, little pointy nose pliers. I'm not quite sure what the proper name for these are, but they do a really good job most of the time. However, if you've got quite a tight clearance around the CV boot here with whatever it's rotating within, gearbox likely here, in this case it's never going to be a problem because it's got a larger section here. But if that's very close to what it's rotating inside, then if the crimp is sticking up, as you can see it sticks up quite a bit there, when you've crimped it, you might find that actually interferes. Now when you crimp with this tool, all it does is squeeze the two vertical sections there together. This little tool is a little bit clever. So when you crimp the clip, it also, this little bit in the middle here, it pushes that tab down so that it squishes it right out of the way, so it sits nice and snug against that diameter so that it doesn't interfere with anything. Now, we don't really need that for these shafts, but it was an excuse for a new tool, and it is technically the right tool for the job rather than this, which was just in the toolbox. So, here goes. Right, cue a little montage of me putting the clips on and crimping them down. You get a nice view of my fat bits and my very long hair, which thanks to lockdown is way overdue cutting, so I do look a bit like a tramp. But I apologise not for that. Yeah, it is what it is. So keep watching and we will get there eventually, I promise. And just in case you're curious, yes, I do drink my tea. I usually make it before doing a job and then drink it when it's cold afterwards. Don't know why. Well, that was easy. So all four crimps are on. I had to cut tails off 3 of them because with the exception to this largest one here, there was quite a bit of excess material that would flap around. So I've just shortened those with a bit of backwards and forward fatigue and then push the leftover ends down so they're nice and neat. And that's it. There you go. All nicely crimped up. It does make them a little bit scraggy, but they're definitely nice and tight. There's no doubt about that. Right, that one's ready to go back on the car. So, same again with the other side, I guess. See, I told you, tea drunk. So just quickly before I do a time-lapse of rebuilding the drive shaft from the driver's side, so this is the one that's got the extra half shaft on, I just thought I'd show you the other type of CV clip. So this is the banded type I talked about before that the other tool is for. So you can see the band comes round, it comes through itself, it's bent over here, and then those two little tabs have been pinned down, and then the excess just sort of folded over out the way. We won't be using those for the rebuild, but, you know, I thought you might be interested to see the other type of clip. And the final budget type of clip, look, someone's used a cable tie, lovely. Okay, back to a time lapse here, mainly so you can't hear me swearing, because the joint would just not come off the end of the shaft. It was a real pain in the proverbial. The issue, again, the circlip that was the problem on the other one, but this time it was even worse. I tried the screwdriver, I tried Robert's pliers trick, but just wouldn't shift it. Swearing out the way, I eventually managed to get the circuit loose, pulled the joint. So with that out of the way, just taped up the joint itself to make sure it stays nice and clean, and then on to removing the boot from the other side and just give the shaft a little bit of a clean before parking that job and getting back on with the ABS ring. First things first, clean off some of the corrosion with the wire brush, then onto the butane torch to see if we can loosen this off like we did before. So I got it nice and hot, gave it a damn good smack with a hammer, but absolutely nothing. So back to the heat and try again. And if at first you don't succeed, well, bollocks to it. The ring was very firmly welded in place with some corrosion, so I just took a hacksaw to it in the end. With that out of the way, back to the CV joint, give that a damn good clean, and then mask it up for a little bit of paint just to neaten it up. This one was in worse shape than the other one. And then on to the rest of the shaft, again, giving that a good clean. Make sure it just looks neat and presentable to go back into the car. Because, let's be honest, nobody wants a dirty shaft, right? So the time lapse is sped up even further because this is actually really quite boring, but I thought I'd document the whole thing. So round and round we go with the wire brush in different sizes, and then it's on to putting the joint back together. So grease in, new boot over, and on to doing the clamps. So first is the larger diameter innermost of the clamps. This one I did up by hand really tight before using the crimps, only to find that I'd actually stretched the banding out, so it had to go in the vise and be manipulated. The smaller outer one went fine in the end. Right, back to the CV joint and the ABS ring. So refitting is the reverse of removal? Well, hopefully, and in this case, it was. So all that remains is to slot the whole thing back together, which sounds dead easy. Beauty of the time lapse is it looks dead easy as well. It really wasn't. For some reason, this rubber boot was a little bit tighter than the others, so CV grease went absolutely bloody everywhere, hence the rubber gloves. But we get a good clean up, put the clamps on, and we're ready to go. And we are done. So this is the auto shaft we took out earlier. This gator here turns out to be a aftermarket cut to size type gator, which is pretty crap. The ABS ring is all right, but it's a bit of a mess. We'll also notice the auto shafts are slightly different to the manual shafts. So it's a good job we decided to refurbish these ones. My original intention was that these might be a substitute alternative, but it would appear not. Anyway, the manual shafts are nicely rebuilt now, so I think they're suitable to go back into the car. Well, that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching me clean my shafts. Next time we're on to clutches and consoles. Exciting new parts, which is always good. If you enjoyed the video, do please like, share and subscribe, and you can find us on all the usual social media outlets. See you soon.